Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining me. For everyone watching, we've got James Benson again from Coyle Developments, and we've asked Eric Simpson to join us. Eric is the owner and financial planner of Simpson Financial Group. And the reason I want Eric to join us on this conversation is this is really just a spin-off of our previous conversation, James. And we started talking about financials and obviously Apex. The condo development that we're really focusing on today. We're both investing in personally, and I got a lot of questions from that webinar, and people were asking me about the financials. We talked about them, but we never really showed them. So, you and I had a spin-off conversation. We got really excited about what's happening in Hamilton, the rental market, the capital appreciation market. Obviously that growth story is really exciting, and we started talking about the long-term numbers and our own personal portfolios. And almost simultaneously, I've been having discussions with Eric, who's working with me personally. He's my financial planner, but also to help create, almost a product or a strategy, I guess, to help, maximize my portfolio and also minimize taxes and any type of maximize returns, just to sum that up. So I thought it'd be great to have us all in a conversation, and we could talk about Apex. James, if you want to start, I'd love to hear just, the rental market there is absolutely crazy. I'm going to go through a few pro formas that you shared with me, and maybe just walk through at a high level what you're seeing in terms of rents and the building that we talked about previously, which is from the same developer that we're discussing, Apex.
Yeah, absolutely. So to do that, I can just rewind maybe 4 or 5 years and just kind of bring people up to speed so they understand. I mean, obviously, Ryan, Hamilton has been absolutely on fire. It's an area that's been growing tremendously. And that's economically, that's obviously with lots of buildings and developments going on there. But what we're seeing too is massive rent growth. We've watched the average price of rent in condos in Hamilton going up over 14% a year on average for the past 5 years. And when you see that,
that's insane.
Yeah, that's not a 1-year blip. That's a 5-year run, right? Like that's been very, very consistent. So we've watched this go up and up. And you had mentioned the last project by the same developer just down the street. Just on the other side of Hess Village. It's just to the north of it by about a block. When I sold that project originally, my cash flow projections for some of the units were I think it was $2,350 to $2,400, let's say, for the big 2 bedrooms. When we went to rent those out a year ago, we weren't getting $2,300 to $2,400. We got $3,300. So we were almost $900 to $1,000 higher than what I had told people that they should be very safe and very comfortable that they would be getting. Yeah, it's nuts. And it's a funny thing. Investors never mind when more money shows up, right? Like they're always very, very happy about that. So obviously lots of happy clients there. But it's been a market that has really even surprised me. And I knew it was coming. I understood, what was happening in Hamilton economically. We knew about the redevelopment. We knew about the migratory trends, et cetera. But to watch the rents take off the way they have and to do what they have as sustainably, like year after year after year, it's just been the same story of crazy growth. It's been a pretty fantastic area, pretty fascinating area, and exciting area to watch.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I've typically put together financial pro formas for buildings, and I share them a lot with our clients in our database. And I'm often criticized based on the numbers and the projections. And it's quite funny. I'll have some financial planners, no disrespect here, but they'll be in my email list. And they'll be like, oh, I don't know, those numbers look a little out of whack. And some people comment on them. But anytime I approach the numbers, I take a conservative approach. I take a long-term average, and I use a conservative number based on that. And anytime I've looked at a building, once it's completed, I go back and look at the financials. Every single time I've actually underestimated what the rents end up being. And I think that's a bigger discussion of why that is. I think, we really see the supply and demand issue right now, and the shortage of housing, which is obviously a driving factor for increased pricing and rents. But, that was kind of a story that's been slowly becoming the story. And that's obviously the biggest, probably the hottest topic around real estate today. But yeah, I think that'll continue to create that rental appreciation and price appreciation. over time. I'd love to share the pro formas that you put together, and maybe you can walk us through a few of these. And what's also important to note as well, you didn't just rent 1 or 2 units in this building. It's not an anomaly. I mean, you sold the building, and I don't know how many rentals did you end up doing in there?
Personally, like over 20 for sure.
Yeah. So
yeah,
and plus you've looked at all the data as well. So I'm
looked at yeah, you're right. There's been that, and you can see what everyone else has been doing as well. I've got people like you that sold, or people, I mean agents, other agents, not you, that had sold in the last building, and I can obviously see their rents as well. It's been a pretty phenomenal story. Absolutely.
Eric, I'm curious. I know you're an investor. You invest in real estate as well. Are you investing in Hamilton or looking at the Hamilton market at all?
I wasn't prior to talking with you guys about this. So, I mean, it's pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah, James, before you jumped on, Eric and I were talking about the numbers, and he's quite interested. So I think by the end of this, he may be buying a condo in your building.
Fantastic.
Okay, James. So love to have you walk us through this. So you've got 4 pro formas here.
The first section at the top above the 2 kind of solid lines is your purchase price of a 2-bedroom unit, the down payment required, so it's 20%, because we're going to approach this as if we're an investor. And then the difference between what we pay for the condo and our down payment is, of course, our mortgage amount. So that's the first section that everyone needs to understand. So purchase price, down payment, and our total mortgage on the property. The next section, the middle section of this pro forma, it's kind of like our monthly performance, right? So we have our rent, which we've come in at $42.18. I'm going to talk to us about how we got to that number in just a moment. Minus all our expenses, our mortgage payment, utilities, condo fees, property taxes, insurance, etc. And what we see is when we look down this, if you look at the line that says actual cash flow, the third line from the bottom in the middle, what we're looking at here is about $672 a month of positive cash flow, and an additional $850 a month of mortgage pay down. So when you talk to Revenue Canada, they'll look at those 2 things and they'll say that is your net income. So this has a net income of about projected net income of $1,522 per month.
Okay. Right. And now I just want to point out this is at a 4% interest rate.
Yeah.
And I know you also have done this at the 5.25 rate, I believe.
Yeah. And even higher, like I think all the way up to 5.75 or 5.95, these things cash flow. And it's really neat when you look at that, because I always like to know that I always like to feel good and safe and secure.
Yeah.
And I know if I've got that much wiggle room, I feel fantastic, especially at today's rates, because I think when we look forward in a few years, I would even expect rates to be below what they are here at 4%, which just means more cash flow, which is fantastic.
Yeah. But yeah, just to point out to the audience, even conservatively at 5.25%, which we have the pro formas, everyone can reach out to us, we can share them. They're still cash flow positive. And I agree. I believe rates will be sub 4% by the time this building is completed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think rents may be pushed up higher and higher with all the immigration that's coming in as well. The reality is we're just so undersupplied right now. It's crazy.
Awesome. All right. Sorry,
okay.
Put that out. Thanks.
No, by all means. Thank you. And then at the bottom here, obviously we've got our net income, which is a combination of the actual cash flow and our mortgage pay down. And we have a net income percentage. So that alone should return us about 13% or 12.68%. And we haven't even added appreciation onto this mix at all. If we add a very conservative 5% annual appreciation, then our total return on investment here jumps to about 38% annually.
And you're using 5%. I mean, Hamilton has seen what has been the growth rate in Hamilton over the last period of time?
I think they're well over 10. It's been pretty nuts. But back to our point, and you said this earlier, and you and I have the same philosophy on this. I'd rather be conservative, because if you show numbers that are conservative or just rooted in kind of the lowest, you're not being optimistic, you're not being pessimistic, you're just kind of showing a very, very realistic scenario. Like I think if you go back to the early 1920s when they started tracking appreciation in Canada, it's been over 5%. So we're looking at almost 100 years of historical data and saying we're going to take the lowest common denominator. And to your point, that hasn't been in towns that have been as high growth or as exciting in terms of economic plans and redevelopment as Hamilton has. So for those reasons, I feel very, very safe with these numbers and very secure with them. These are what I put in my performance all the time.
Yeah.
The other thing is we look at rents. So I mentioned earlier that the rents in Hamilton have been going up about 14% per year. Well, when we look at what the rent's going to be in the future, some people would take 14% and just, add that every single year from now until, let's say, final closing of the building. We didn't do that here. We took just about half. So I mentioned 14 was the average. We didn't take 7, we took 8%. So it's just over kind of 50% of what we've been averaging for the past 5 years. Again, supported by future immigration trends and the housing shortage that we do have now. And we applied an 8% growth factor to today's rents. So right now, if I were to rent this same unit out, the rent wouldn't be $42.18. I think we did one last year, just like this, for $3,300 a month, right? So we're about $900 off of this with 8% growth for the next 4 years. We're going to be at those numbers. Like, the math actually adds up. And if anyone that has any questions, like you said, they can reach out to you for these performance, but all the notes are down here kind of in the bottom underneath where it says notes. It talks about the average growth that we're using. It talks about the average numbers that we've been using. It's all documented here. So we're just
fascinating. The rents are near Toronto rents.
They are.
The prices are really obviously a fraction. And this is interesting. Like, we're talking a lot about cash flow right now. And I think, a lot of investors invest for cash flow. I personally focus on capital appreciation but cash flow is obviously a very important thing. But this offers both. I've been investing in Hamilton now for a number of years because of the growth from a price appreciation perspective. And cash flow for me has just been a bonus. I'm curious, Eric, because I know you've got a portfolio as well. You've done incredibly well with real estate. Typically, when you're investing, what are you looking for? Is it most important to be cash flow? Or are you looking for a market that has capital appreciation, or both?
Capital appreciation for me. I don't want to show any positive cash flow personally. I want those things to cancel out. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I do that as well, and that's why I'm constantly refinancing. And that's the beauty of that is some people want positive cash flow. You're paying tax on that. You can leverage that, pull out equity, go reapply it, invest more, double down, so to speak, and not have to worry about a big tax bill.
Absolutely.
It's funny, to your point though. It's not something that everyone goes after, but it's on this call we have 3 different people and we have some different outlooks. I love cash flow. Like, not because I love paying tax. I hate paying tax. I do recognize it's not as efficient. And I would probably do far better over time if I just kept refinancing everything out and buying more condos. I get it. But I look at that and I go, right, the cash flow is there. Yeah, the appreciation will come. There'll be years where the markets will appreciate like crazy. And the more real estate we have when that happens, obviously the more money we make. Yeah. And there's years where it doesn't grow a lot. And those years, I've got some cash flow there and everything is kind of set aside. But your life is very stress-free. When it doesn't have to be massive cash flow. I bought properties literally with $2 a month of positive cash flow. Like it seems silly, but I don't have to feed it then. My investment always pays me. Even if it's a small amount, I never have to feed it. And as long as I don't have to feed it and it can take its time, to your point, and grow over time, it can appreciate, we can go on a 5-year, 10-year run where we see massive, massive growth. That's where the real money really comes in. I love it. So, to your point, massive cash flow is not a huge thing. I just like to be at least break even.
Hey, look, it's peace of mind. I get that, but what's really going to make you rich is the appreciation, right?
You're 100% right.
But look, everyone's different. Some people want it to sleep better at night, and I totally get that. So these are incredible numbers. They're monster numbers. So that's a 2-bedroom. This here, walk us through this. So this is the 1-bedroom and down.
Yeah, so I'll go a little faster this time because I've kind of talked through some of it. So here we have a $575,000 purchase price, a mortgage of about $460,000, rent of $3,401, and we'll jump down. We've got a cash flow of $628. We've got mortgage pay down to another $679 for net income of $1,307 per month on this property. And if we never count appreciation, that gets us almost a 14% return at 13.64%. Great numbers. Like, if you're investing your money and you're getting almost 14% a year, you're doing great. But then there's the magic of real estate. You put, the appreciation on there and understand that we're only putting 20% down, but are getting as investors the benefit of the entire property going up. We didn't pay cash for the entire thing. The bank gave us, 80% of what we need. we put down only 20, but all of the growth is ours. We don't share that with the bank. It's actually, they're great business partners that way. They give up most of the money and we keep all the upside.
Yeah.
So you've got a total return here of about 38.64, 39% annually is a very, very reasonable projection. And it's so funny because whenever people look at pro formas for the first time investing in real estate, they say, there's no way that can't be true. It's smoke and mirrors. It's this, it's really just numbers, but there's a reason that 90% of the world's millionaires made their money in real estate. There is this factor of it. The easiest way to look at it, I look at 3 ways to make money in real estate when you're looking at these pro formas. And I call it, the appetizer, the main course, and the dessert. The appetizer is the mortgage pay down. Those tenants are business partners. They're going to give us money every month, and that's going to make the mortgage payment for us. When they make the mortgage payment, the amount we owe goes down. So we made money that way. The main course could be cash flow. It's cash flow because, we sit down in a restaurant, we're having our meal, we have a little bit of cash flow. Same thing. Not super exciting, but a nice thing to have. The dessert is your capital appreciation because that stuff is sweet. That is your favorite part of the meal. It's a thing you look forward. It's when you're all said and done, when you sell the asset, you're checking out. The dessert's like the last thing you have at a restaurant. And when you look at those 3 things, if you look at real estate just like a meal, you look at those 3 factors. Those are 3 different ways that we make money, and the cumulative effect of those monies, or the cumulative effect of those three aspects, are what give you the giant returns. It's the dessert that gives us the biggest point of return, which is what you and Eric were talking about earlier. You love that capital appreciation. The dessert is by far the best part, but that's why these returns are so high. That's why when you look at these percentages, it seems nuts, because you can put your money in a GIC and you can get your 5%, have fun. Or you can use a time-trusted, proven strategy and make real wealth. And you can make real wealth when you're getting 30+% returns.
I love that. That's a great analogy. I may have to steal that from you.
It's okay. I stole it from someone else, so please feel free to take it.
Really, really well said. And I'm excited because I took your pro formas, and I'll show some numbers shortly that kind of put the total value, the portfolio, but then I show that over a long period of time. And, then we'll talk about some strategy, how to preserve that with Eric. So the confidence, just to walk through a few units. So this is the 1-bed.
Yep. Yeah, so we just keep coming down here in price, right? We had the big units up around the 700s, and we have the ones closer to the 600s. This is down to the 5s.
So the last one, I meant to ask you, James, what was the rent you're getting right now in the 1+1s?
The 1+ dens, I think that was 2,600. I'd have to actually go back and double check. Actually, no, I have something right here. Give me
I wrote down the average. Yeah, so
2,600.
2,600.
Okay,
interesting.
right.
And then you use 2,500 for this. So the
1 bedrooms were only 2,500. It's only $100 off, which is crazy.
These are real
no, these are actuals. And to be honest with you, these rents are last year's rents, because when the building was registering, and Ryan, if you feel differently than what I'm about to say, please give me your perspective on this. The first time you rent a building, everybody's renting a building. Everyone's renting at the same time. So typically, very competitive. The rents you get on an initial lease up are not typically as high as what you get in subsequent years. It hasn't been a year since we've leased up this building yet, so we don't have a lot of those follow-up leases that have come into place. So I would expect that as we come into like November, December, January this year, because the building started registering last year in November, we're going to start to see some of those higher lease numbers coming in. So I'm using last year's numbers with a lot of these. So there's probably been a year's worth of growth on these. We'll find out in about 6 months. We'll see.
And that's definitely true. I see that in every building.
Yeah. So this is a 1-bedroom unit. Just over 500,000 for the purchase price, and we have a total mortgage of 407. Again, when we forward forecast our rents from today's rent, applying that 8% per year growth factor, which is about half of what it's actually growing at or has been growing at for the past 5 years. Excuse me. We have a rent of $29.93. We'll scroll down to cash flow of about $540 a month, mortgage pay down of $602, and net income of $1141. And again, we're getting about 13.5% ROI on our cash and our mortgage pay down, the appetizer and the main course. And now the dessert, when we add that in at the end, with only 5% market growth, we've got about a 38.4% return on investment annually.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And it gets even more exciting when I break down the long-term numbers. So let me just pull them up here.
This is actually my favorite. This is like, you and I were geeking out on this for a while, and the messages, the text messages that we shot back and forth about this
Yeah.
shop, it's kind of fun. This is where it gets really exciting. For me as a dad, I'm always looking forward as to how I can take care of my daughter, right? Like when she's gone, I'm a very protective father, as I think most dads are over their kids, and I think especially daughters. But I always want to know that she's fine. I always want to know that my daughter's fine, that, 40 years after I'm gone, she's going to be fine. There's an element of me, a protective element of me, that always wants to make sure that my family is good. And here's where, when we look at these numbers that you're going to show, it gets really exciting for me, because you can sleep at night if you've taken the right steps. Time is your friend. Time is your biggest ally whenever it comes to investments. And I know Eric's nodding his head over there, because obviously as a financial planner, he gets the compounding, the concept of compounding interest. And I think
Absolutely.
the Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of all time, that said, the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. But Ryan, please, I love this part. So please, looking forward to this.
I'm just trying to pull it up here. And you know what's interesting? While I'm just trying to pull up the screen here, to all your points, I think probably the most consistent buyer we're seeing in the market right now are parents actually buying for their children. So they're seeing, affordability, what's happening there, and how difficult it is to secure, home ownership. So we're seeing a lot of that,
where they're proactively going out and buying it for their kids, so they know their kids will be fine in the future.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I've been having that conversation with a lot of people recently as well. And it's a funny thing. As long as you're in the market, you're moving up with the market. It's not running away from you. You'll never outsave the market. It just isn't going to happen for a million reasons. But like, really, when something is compounding at 5% a year, it's tough to catch. And then if you think about it, remember, most people aren't buying cash for these. They don't have that like cash to put down on a house. They're getting leverage, or they're getting money from the bank to do it. So your salary can only save up typically enough for a down payment, not for an entire home.
Yeah.
So you'll just never catch it.
Yeah.
So like you, I'm hoping a lot of people that are doing this too.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first one. This is the Serenity. So just to walk everyone through these numbers, this is the number I really want to showcase here. But so, the 719,900 is the starting price for that unit. We're not looking at cash flow. This isn't accurate, because this is as of today. So if you were to buy that today based on today's rents, you'd be negative cash flow. But the beauty of buying pre-construction is you're buying into the future, right? So you're putting a deposit on an appreciating piece of paper, and then by the time you actually take out a mortgage and finance it, you've got that rent appreciation and price appreciation. So what I'm trying to showcase here is the time value of money, leverage, compounding, and at a very conservative, so below the 40-year average, below the 10-year, the 20, the 15, the 5-year average, at 5% compounded annual growth, that condo will be worth $2.321 million in 25 years. Okay, so I just want to kind of add all these together. So then, if someone, my client, many of my clients, I should say, when they like a project, they buy multiple units. So I think this is a really good, opportunity. Obviously, a good deposit, great cash flow, and the pricing's really good. So if someone were looking at buying multiple units here, let's kind of look at this, what it looks like over a long term. And this here is the 1+10, so the original purchase price of $574. In 25 years, this is what it looks like, $1.854 million. At that point, you probably have a little bit of mortgage left, possibly not. And then if you look at the one bedroom, 509,900, 1.64 million. So, I mean, that's an incredible amount of wealth, very a risk-averse way of doing it. And when you then look at all of them, so this is where it gets interesting. If you were to buy 3 condos, a 1-bedroom, a 1-bedroom and down, a 2-bedroom in Apex today, in 25 years, based on 5% growth, you've increased your net worth by $5.82 million. Now, there may be a little bit of debt still on there, depending on your mortgage. We did use a 30-year amortization, so you've got 5 years left of mortgage payments. But what gets interesting is over time, you see these numbers jump. Sure. I mean, it's incredible the amount of growth you see just by doing nothing. This is just compounding. And, almost double the amount of time. You've got $12 million. Another 20 years later, you've got $32 million portfolio. 80 years later, you've got an $85 million portfolio. And then 100 years later, you've got a $226 million portfolio. And these are when the numbers get really fun, because you just bought 3 condos. And, you know, everyone might be thinking right now, well, I'm not going to live to 100 years. But where I thought our conversation got interesting last time was, you know, most people aren't actually buying for themselves right now. They're buying for their children. But if you want to take that a step further, you want to start talking about multi-generational wealth and, you know, legacy wealth. What does that really look like? How do you achieve it through real estate? And, you know, these numbers are just incredible.
The reality is, you look at 226 million and you think, okay, to your point, I can't use that today. That's not a realistic number today. I have to wait for time to take over and the compound to happen. If you had pictured not your grandpa, but maybe your grandpa's father doing like something like this or putting this plan in place, how different would your life be today?
Yeah,
like during the pandemic, when everyone was locked down, you could hop on a private plane, fly anywhere you want in the world, and do anything. You're not constrained. The rules of society don't apply to you when you have that level of wealth. They just don't. In a 3-property portfolio,
3 condos. Like, I still can't wrap my head around it. It's amazing.
That's the mind-blowing part. This is achievable for just about everybody. It may not be achievable in year 1, no problem. It may take you 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It doesn't matter. This is achievable in your lifetime. This can be your legacy. You can pass something like this down. So, like in my case, where I get excited about this, my daughter's going to be fine. My daughter's children are going to be fine. And beyond that, it just keeps getting better. You're changing the game. You're changing the game for everybody in your lineage.
I love that. And I got so excited about this in our conversation. So I went and did this for my portfolio. I didn't create a slide, but I did it just before our webinar. I wrote it down. So my portfolio today is worth approximately $37 million. Now, that's over 20 years of investing, compounding everything that we've talked about. That's what it looks like after 20 years. Now, if I did nothing today and waited another 40 years, it would be $260 million. If I waited 60 years, it would be $691 million. But this is when it gets really interesting. This is compounding. Like, when you're talking about big numbers, the numbers are just unbelievable. This is 5% growth. This is below the 45-year average. 80 years is $1,883 million. And if I did want to, you know, build a family legacy and pass this on to my grandchildren, my grandchildren's grandchildren, in 100 years, my portfolio would be worth $4.8 billion. And those are real numbers. That's 5% compounded annual growth. So, I mean, that's mind blowing to me. And, you know, that's really why I wanted Eric to join us as well, because, you know, when you're talking about that kind of money, that kind of strategy where you want to pass on multi-generational wealth, it's, you know, I think you need to do a lot of planning around that. And, you know, I'd love to hear, like, you know, as a planner and an investor yourself, what is the best strategy to kind of preserve that wealth, to structure in a way that, you know, there's obviously a death tax when it gets passed on to the next generation. Like, what's a good way to structure this?
Well, typically we see these investment properties being held in a holding company of some sort. The benefit to that is that we're using corporation after-tax dollars, right? So typically we'll see, if you're getting a small business deduction, you're getting taxed at 12.5% on any type of retained earnings. So right there, we're getting a lot more money that we can use towards a down payment instead of pulling it out personally. If you're at the highest tax bracket, over 53%, right? So we're able to buy a lot more at the beginning. And now from that, so James, you like cash flow. We're able to control that cash flow within the corporation and not take that money personally. So we're also saving a lot more within the corporation, which is nice. And then we can use leverage.
A little side note, corporation is also very important for people to get financing. It actually makes it easier. And this is like a whole other discussion, but for those of you listening, I may not be able to buy 5 condos because I'd only be able to get financing for 2 or 3. There is a strategy to do them through holding corps because they don't show up on your personal credit report with many any of the banks. Happy to discuss that with anyone who wants to reach out. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. And it actually just reminded me of James. You were comparing the 5% of throwing it into a GIC versus this and your return. And if you're putting $100,000 down, you're going to get the 5% from a GIC compared to taking a $500,000 condo and getting the growth on that. Is the taxation on that, right? So a GIC, you're getting full interest tax on that, right. Where in the condo on the growth, it's capital gains, which is taxed a lot more efficiently in the hands of the end user. So, but we'll flash forward to, you're 65, you're 70, you're 80 years old, and you've built this, we'll call it an empire, if you will, of where that wealth accumulation has happened. And it's in a corporation, and you're kind of sitting there, well, what do we do now? I want to pass that on to my kids. A very common strategy we'd use is an estate freeze. So what we're doing is we're going to freeze the shares of that corporation. And that way we're quantifying exactly what the tax bill is going to be. Because if you don't do that, and let's say you're 90 and you die, we don't know what that tax bill is going to be until that moment. And let's say your tax bill is, $10 million. Where is that $10 million of cash going to come from? Now, your beneficiaries are going to have to come up with that capital. So are we dissolving the properties that you've worked so hard to create and that wealth? What if we're in a market like, last year where, one every 10 years, we seem to have a bad real estate market with 9 good ones. Like, what if we're in that 1 year and we have to do a fire sale of something you worked so hard to kind of build up? So if we freeze that the shares, either using what's called a Section 85 or an 86 freeze, depending on how we structure it, we can then insure the preferred shares. So we know that tax bill is taken care of and that your portfolio is not going to be harmed by that. So that's one strategy we use. Another critical piece is your wills, right? So everybody usually has a will. You'd be amazed at how many clients that I take on that don't have a secondary or a corporate will and don't know that one of those even exists or what they're for. So we want to keep as much out of, your probated will as possible. And we want to have a corporate will to then dictate what's going to happen to those shares. And so that it doesn't have to go through probate. That's another critical piece. And if anybody listening here, needs a good estate lawyer or anything, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to connect you with one that really knows what they're doing.
I may have to connect with you on that myself.
Yeah. So it's a critical piece that seems to get lost. And it's a very simple step to make sure that the most amount of wealth is transferring the way that you want it to transfer to, right? So to your kids. And whether or not we're setting up testamentary trusts from that will. And another big thing is that if you don't plan early enough, there is double taxation within corporations on death, right? So there's a deemed disposition on the day before you die. So there's a tax bill there. And then if it goes down to the next level to your new shareholders, if they ever want to pull out any money from it, they just got taxed on that. And now they're going to get paid out on the dividend to their personal tax bracket as well. So there's ways we can avoid that if we plan properly. So It's critical.
Yeah, that could be a significant amount of money. I'd love to hear about your strategy for the long-term wealth as well, James, because I thought that was really interesting. One thing I just talked about with my portfolio is the value of the portfolio. But what's I think really interesting, and I gather this is along the lines of your strategy, because it gave me the idea to do this, was building it within some sort of structure, whether it's a trust or not, but protecting the asset. So it's also producing cash flow. Like think about what a $4 billion portfolio is producing in terms of cash flow. I haven't worked out those numbers yet, but I'm sure that it's quite interesting. In probably the tens of millions of dollars, I imagine. So yeah, I'd love to hear like what's your strategy for multi-generational wealth?
So I did a lot of the same things that Eric was just talking about. You got the insurance policies. You definitely have multiple wills, because the name of the game here is don't let the government take the money that you don't have to let them take. There's taxes. There's let's say there's illegal tax avoidance where people hide stuff, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about perfectly legal, time-tested, proven methods to really reduce or minimize the tax. You're going to have to pay tax. So the question is, how do we make that tax bill as close to zero as possible? And actually, I think with what you were talking about earlier, there's ways to essentially make that tax bill disappear with different insurance products or different ways that you can structure putting these things together. But I've done a lot of what he suggested. I've got multiple wills. I think what you're driving at though, Ryan, is I set up a trust with rules. So when it comes to my child or kids, they don't ever actually get control over the real estate. I mean, I've seen lots of people whose families, kids inherit massive wealth, and then they sell off all these assets that grew and grew and grew. Well, when we look at these compounding numbers, I want that to go from 226 million to billions and billions and billions over the generations. And all you need is one kid that's maybe a bit of a screw up to take the money, liquidate all the assets, spend it, buy private jets, do whatever the heck they're going to do, go to Las Vegas, develop a gambling problem, whatever. I don't want that to ever happen. So I locked everything down. My kids can spend 50% of the cash flow that comes from the rental properties. And that gets divided by the amount of active children, grandchildren, whatever I have at the time. And so they each get their proportionate share. On top of that, let's say I have any stocks, bonds, other holdings, they can spend up to 4% of the total value of those investments annually. And the reason I've chosen the 4% number is over time, if you take out just 4% a year, the natural markets and how things have moved historically, you'll never actually dip back into the principal. And all I want is I want my money to keep growing. I never want this to stop compounding. But realize I still have to have, the whole point of building this and leaving it behind is so that you can provide whether it's protection for your children, or whether it's opportunities for your children, whatever it is. So the way I've structured is my assets can never go away. They can only continue to be added to and grown.
I love
that. And then the other thing I did was I managed the age. So, and then this is a personal thing. So I'll tell you what I've done personally. I made it so if I die tomorrow, I've got my trust set up. My daughter gets to get help through school. And so if she needs help paying university and tuition and things like that, that is there. And there's a trustee that will be administering this trust. So if my daughter is failing out of school because she's not doing what she should be doing, because we don't go to school to fail, then she gets no money for university. But if she's going and passing her courses and things like that, great, she gets reimbursed for tuition. When she graduates, she gets to get a used car, only because I'm not trying to shoot the lights out here and get her used to maybe a crazy lifestyle. You can go buy yourself a nice, reliable Honda, a Toyota, something low mileage, whatever. I just want her to be safe. I want her a safe car, reliable car. But this is not about building a lifestyle of affluence. This is about building protection. This was my philosophy. Other people may be different. When she goes to buy her first house, there's another milestone there where the trustee at their discretion, provided everything else in life is in check, can give her the money for a down payment on a house, so that she can qualify and move into a safe neighborhood with good schools, the places where you would want your child to live. And same thing for a wedding. If I'm not around, I want those things paid for. This is as a dad, these are the things that I want to gift my child. I don't want them to step into the world with debt. I don't want them to step into the world of friction. And it makes me proud, or makes me happy inside to know that these little stresses in life are not ones that my child is going to have to face because I've set it up. Now, again, I haven't set it up so that they can liquidate everything, go to Las Vegas and become stupid. I've tried to set it up so everything's going to grow. It's going to grow for multiple generations, and my people, my family, are going to be protected, and they're going to be protected in a way that is the best that I can do. That's all I can do. But my hope is that years from now, they talk about great grandpa James, who put this legacy in motion. And this is why we have what we have today, or this is why we are what we are, because he's the guy that looked forward multiple generations, took the steps, took the actions. And, I look at this 3-property portfolio is still up on my screen, and it's just like, just
So
what
easy.
anyone can do. It is, even if it takes you 10 years to do it, one every 3 years, who cares?
Yeah.
You can do it. Everyone can do this.
Yeah. I'm learning a lot here right now. Like I don't have that structure, and Eric, we need to talk. So I'm inspired here by James's structure. I love the rules. I love the control. And it's interesting because this didn't even register, with me until really our conversation. But when I think about it, when I think about all my kids, my friends growing up when I was a kid, the wealthiest kids were typically because their grandfather had invested in real estate. And it makes so much sense right now. That's really cool. So that's a really detailed structure. Derek, is that something, I know obviously you can help with that. Is that a kind of lawyers, planners?
Yeah. So usually what happens is when you're at this type of wealth and it's more of a roundtable discussion. So it would be, client, myself, accountant, and lawyer. And because everybody has different family dynamics, right? And like you said, you could have somebody who's very successful and then they're in that real estate business. Maybe they're dealing with the property management of the business, or they have their own successful business. Then you've got a spendthrift child who you're like, well, I got to make sure that you don't blow everything. And it's very common. And another thing that people don't consider, and is getting more and more common, is people leaving Canada. So kids going to school in the States and then staying there. Like that's happened to my brother. My brother has lived in the States for the last 10 years, and it changes everything from a planning perspective, because you don't want them on, obviously I'm talking very high level here, but you don't want them on your trust. You don't want them as an executor of your estate, because it really changes the dynamics of how you can administer things. And the trust laws between Canada and the US are very different. And so you can get double taxation there as well. So anytime there's a substantial change in your life, you should be going back to your planner or whoever and being like, hey, this happened. Does this change the structure of the strategy that we've put in place? And the last thing that that's on my mind is that people forget about, if you will, is usually if you have a good accountant and you have a portfolio full of property, they're going to do depreciation deductions on that property every year for you. And because if we can take advantage of that tax deduction now, we're going to, right? The problem is on the flip side, when we either sell it, or we're talking about estate transfers. So if we die, we have CCA recapture, which we need to consider. And if you're talking about a portfolio of this size, that could be millions and millions of dollars that you weren't considering that would come back to you on your income tax line. So just another kind of seed to plant there to remember. And that can also be taken care of when we're looking at the full plan, either when you're doing the estate freezer or what, we can try and grow that CCA with that, the recapture with that insurance to take care of that as well.
This kind of reminds me of that song, Mo Money, Mo Problems.
Yeah,
it does get a little bit complicated, but to your point, Eric, it's the solution to all this is actually very simple.
Yes.
Not many people like the idea of doing a will, because you're contemplating you not being around. That's not a fun thing. But what is fun is contemplating about, okay, when I'm not here, how can I make everyone else's life better? The people I love, the people I care about. And to your point, someone like you has so many different thoughts and such a great understanding of how this all meshes together. We don't have to understand it fully. We just have to understand what's going to happen. We don't have to understand the whys and the hows. Just like, when I pass, this happens, this happens, this happens. I don't have to worry about my kids paying tax. I don't have to worry about anything else. And everything I built gets passed along to someone else, and it's kept whole. When you know that's how it works, it feels good. And I can tell you, as having gone through that process not that long ago, it's not a difficult process. It's an intimidating process because we don't know it and we don't understand it. But someone like you, I'm guessing, similar to, when Ryan looks at an investment property, for him, it's an easy thing. He analyzes it very, very quickly. If you don't know how to do that, it's an intimidating thing. Yeah. For most of us, we don't know how to do what you do. So it's intimidating. But really, when you go through the process with someone that's an expert, with someone that really knows how to do it, it's actually quite simple. And in hindsight, you look back and think that really wasn't that big a deal. It was actually a lot easier than I thought.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a painful process. It definitely shouldn't be painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? I wanted to highlight the same thing, James. It's like, you know, my slogan is real estate made simple, and it really is. People tend to overcomplicate these things, but when you work with professionals that have already done what you want to accomplish, it really isn't difficult. Like, I mean, here we're showing how to turn 3 properties into $226 million, and you've got someone on like Eric who can help, maximize those returns and minimize taxes and help pass that on to families. So I think it's really exciting. Now, I just like, before we wrap things up, I'm curious, is this for everyone? I mean, obviously we're showing a small portfolio here worth a heck of a lot of money. Do people who own just a few properties, do they set up these types of structures? What do you guys think?
Absolutely. And I think you've demonstrated that with your three properties and what that can extrapolate to, right? And so even if it's 1 or 2, these numbers will still get significant. Like, it's when you look at those numbers, they are big and they look like they're blown out of proportion. But if you just look back 10 years and what you could have bought a house for in Milton or Oakville, like you're now buying townhouses for, 1.5, $1.8 million, where you used to be able to get them for 400. So these numbers, they make sense. So
it's a funny thing because you look at them, and to your point, they don't make sense to the average person because they can't believe that a small action can turn into that. But I don't know if you've ever come across this, Ryan. I'm sure you have. You've got a friend that's interested in a property, and you pull it up on Geo Warehouse, and you see that this person has owned this property since 1943 or 1963 or something like that. And you look at the price. Oh, they got it for $17,000 in Toronto or $21,000. And, I used to see these things. I was blown away by it. And then the older I get, the more I'm turning into that person. Right? I remember my first home in Toronto, a little over $200,000. That same home now is over $2 million.
Yeah.
And so people look at it and they think the days are gone or that's past. But like, I've lived that in my lifetime. I've lived that, and I don't think there's any reason to think that won't continue. And that's really what these numbers are. It's compounding growth over time. It's simple. It's not exciting. It's not high drama. It's not stress filled. It's almost like a set it and forget it thing. And when you do it, you've done the work. You just kind of go, okay. And it doesn't feel like you've done anything. That's the really, really trippy part. I mean, if you look back to all the properties you've ever bought, and you fast forward 1 year, not a big deal. 5 years, like, oh, okay, that's cool. 10 years, you sit there scratching your head. If you've owned a property for 10 years, you go, how is it worth that much? Because I remember what I paid for it. And me personally, this is a me thing. I don't know if you guys go through this. Every piece of property I buy, I go, oh, did I do the right thing? You start kind of going through your head, like, did I pay too much? Whatever. You go 1 year out in the future, and you're a genius because the market has just keep marching on. You feel good, and then 10 years, it's like Einstein. Like,
and that's, I mean, to that point, I mean, look, I always take the long-term outlook at it, and it's like, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen in a year, COVID, all these things, but you do know or are confident what's going to happen in 10 years. Yeah. And there's just, you can see it over and over and over again throughout history. Long before I was around, that real estate does that. And, I think more now than ever, when you look at the fundamentals of supply and demand and what creates price appreciation in real estate as an investment, I think those fundamentals are suggesting that we're going to see a lot more price growth. Canada's a relatively new country. When you go and look at major cities in Europe and, other continents and countries, you see very, very expensive real estate prices. And when you look into it and you ask and talk to people, it's typically owned by a small segment of people. Most people are renters, and it's the very, very wealthy old families that have been holding and buying real estate for a long period of time.
Well, you're right on the age of Canada. Compare us back to Europe. Go to London, England, and try and buy a 3,000 square foot home right now. I hope you have millions and millions and millions of pounds or dollars, whatever, laying around to buy that, because it becomes very, very difficult. The older a country is, the more expensive the real estate gets. It's happened basically everywhere else in the world in old established cities, towns, countries. It's like we're why would we be different than everywhere else? Like literally everywhere else in the world in that regard.
Yeah. I love it. That was a great conversation. I think on that note, let's wrap it up. I appreciate your time, guys. I will include your contact information in the email, and look forward to connecting with you guys soon.
Awesome.
Right on. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yes.